The shoreline at Portland is quiet in the way only early medieval coasts ever were. No fortifications dominate the cliffs. No watchtowers scan the horizon. The sea rolls with the same rhythm it always has, carrying fishing boats, driftwood, and occasionally strangers. In the year 789, nothing about the sight of ships offshore immediately signals danger. 3 vessels sit low in the water, their hulls unfamiliar but not alarming. They have come from the open sea, not with banners raised or war cries carried on the wind, but with silence. Along the coast of Wessex, this silence is interpreted as routine. A mounted official is dispatched. He is not armored like a warrior expecting battle. He wears the authority of a king, not the equipment of a soldier. His name, preserved imperfectly through centuries of copied chronicles, is usually given as Bedehard. He is a reeve, an administrator, a royal representative whose job is to impose order, collect dues, and ensure that the king's law reaches even the edges of the realm. When ships arrive, especially unannounced, it is his responsibility to meet them. England is not a vacuum. Coastal landings are regulated. Trade flows in and out. Foreign merchants arrive from Francia. Shipwreck survivors wash ashore. None of this is unusual. What is unusual is how wrong the assumptions will be. Bedehard rides toward the beach with a small group of men. Not a war band, not a levy, just enough presence to assert authority. The approach is procedural, almost mechanical. In the Anglo-Saxon world, hierarchy and obligation are clear. Land belongs to the king. Access to it is conditional. Foreigners do not simply step onto English soil and act independently. They are brought to a royal estate. They account for themselves. They pay what is owed. The reeve's role is to enforce that expectation. The 3 ships are close enough now for details to emerge. The hulls are long and narrow, built for speed rather than cargo capacity. Their bows curve upward, unfamiliar to local eyes. The men aboard them do not behave like merchants preparing wares or emissaries waiting to be received. They do not signal submission. They do not move to comply. Instead, they watch. There is a moment, brief, unrecorded in any source, where meaning hangs in the balance. Language fails. Gestures are misread. Authority is asserted by someone who assumes it will be recognized. On one side is a bureaucratic worldview shaped by law, custom, and precedent. On the other is a sea-born culture where landfall is not regulated by distant kings, and where an armed stranger demanding control is not an official but a threat. Violence follows with shocking speed. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records it with brutal economy. The reeve and his men are killed. There is no description of a struggle, no heroic last stand, no extended clash. The event is over almost as soon as it begins. The attackers do not pursue further inland. They do not burn buildings or seize territory. They do not linger. They return to their ships and put back to sea, leaving behind bodies and confusion. From a purely tactical perspective, the encounter is small. No town falls. No monastery is looted. No army marches in response. It would be easy, even for contemporaries, to see it as an isolated act of lawlessness, a tragic but limited incident on a distant shore. Yet embedded within this brief clash is a pattern England has not yet learned to recognize. The problem is not the deaths themselves, but what they represent. Bedehard is not killed because he is weak or careless by the standards of his world. He is killed because the framework he operates within does not apply to the men he confronts. His authority is real, but only within a system that assumes shared rules. The strangers on the beach do not share them. They arrive by sea, answer to no local lord, and leave before consequences can reach them. The mechanisms of justice, summons, retaliation, compensation, are rendered useless by distance and speed. For centuries, the sea has functioned as a boundary for Anglo-Saxon England. It separates the island from the continent, providing both connection and protection. Threats come over land, announced by scouts, delayed by terrain. Armies can be tracked, intentions inferred. Time exists to respond. What happens at Portland exposes a flaw in that assumption. The sea is not a wall. It is a road, and those who travel it can choose when and where to appear. This is not yet understood in 789, but it is felt. The fact that the attackers withdraw immediately is as significant as the violence itself. They do not seek occupation. They seek opportunity. The goal is not conquest, but advantage, testing reactions, seizing moments, escaping before resistance forms. It is a form of warfare that does not fit neatly into existing categories. Not invasion, not trade, not diplomacy. Something else, undefined but deeply unsettling. Later generations will focus on Lindisfarne. In 793, the sack of the monastery will horrify Christendom. Holy ground violated, monks slaughtered, treasure taken from a sacred place. That attack will burn itself into memory because it is spectacular, because it confirms fears in a way Portland does not. Yet Lindisfarne is not the beginning. It is the confirmation. Portland is the warning that goes largely unheeded. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle includes the incident precisely because it feels wrong, because it breaks expectations. A royal official killed not in rebellion or war, but in the execution of routine duty. Authority challenged not by rival kings, but by men who arrive, strike, and vanish. There is no enemy to pursue, no battle to win. Only the realization that something has changed, even if no one can yet articulate how. In retrospect, the encounter reads like a prototype: fast coastal arrival, immediate targeted violence, withdrawal before retaliation, minimal exposure, maximum psychological impact. These elements will repeat themselves along the coast of Britain for generations. Villages will learn to fear the horizon. Monasteries will become targets not because they are weak, but because they are predictable. The sea will cease to be neutral. But here at Portland, none of that future is visible. There is only the aftermath, bodies on the sand, a duty fulfilled according to law and answered with death. News traveling inland slowly, stripped of context, difficult to interpret. Was this banditry? Piracy? A one-off atrocity? The administrative machinery of Wessex has no category for what has occurred. That absence of understanding is the true damage. Bedohard will not become a celebrated martyr. There will be no shrine raised to his memory. He will exist as a name in a line of text, a casualty of first contact. His death will not immediately change policy or provoke reform. The coastal defenses of England will remain thin. The assumption that order governs landings will persist until it cannot. What begins at Portland is not a war, but a lesson delivered too quietly to be fully learned. 3 ships are enough to demonstrate that the rules of engagement have shifted. The men who arrive from the sea are not interested in fitting into existing structures. They exploit them. They move through the gaps between law and force, between expectation and reality. The Viking Age does not announce itself with horns and flames. It begins with misunderstanding, a demand for dues, and a moment where routine proves fatal. Only later will England understand that this small, almost forgettable incident was the opening line of a much longer and bloodier story. The aftermath at Portland does not echo immediately across England. There is no sudden mobilization, no coastal doctrine rewritten in response to 3 ships and a dead official. News travels inland at the speed of writers and rumor, stripped of detail with every retelling. By the time it reaches royal ears, it is already being framed in familiar terms: an isolated killing, an act of lawlessness, an unfortunate encounter with violent foreigners. The machinery of the kingdom absorbs it the way bureaucracies always do, by categorizing it until it feels manageable. That instinct to normalize the abnormal will prove costly. What England lacks in 789 is not courage or manpower, but conceptual framework. There is no model for an enemy that refuses to stay put, that does not declare intent, that does not hold ground. Warfare, as understood by Anglo-Saxon rulers, is territorial and visible. Armies gather. Borders are crossed. Battles are fought. Even raiding, when it occurs, is usually local and predictable. What happens at Portland fits none of these patterns. The attackers arrive without warning, kill representatives of royal authority, and leave before any response can form. The absence of escalation is precisely what makes the event so difficult to interpret. Yet for the men who came ashore, the logic is clear. Scandinavian seafaring culture has been evolving for generations before this moment. Shipbuilding technology has reached a point where speed, shallow draft, and seaworthiness combine into something uniquely flexible. These vessels are not designed for commerce alone. They are tools of movement, capable of crossing open water, navigating rivers, and landing almost anywhere. More importantly, they free their crews from dependence on fixed supply lines or territorial control. A raid does not need to succeed politically to succeed materially. Survival and profit are enough. Portland demonstrates that this logic works. No force pursues the ships. No counterattack follows them across the sea. The risk-to-reward ratio favors the attackers overwhelmingly. Even the killing of a royal official carries no immediate consequence. From the perspective of those aboard the ships, the encounter confirms something essential. The coast is exposed and authority weakens rapidly beyond the shoreline. England, meanwhile, continues as before. For years later, Lindisfarne burns. That attack shocks the Christian world precisely because it fits expectations of catastrophe. A holy place violated, monks killed or enslaved, sacred objects taken as plunder. Alcuin of York will write of it with apocalyptic language, framing the event as divine punishment. Chroniclers will fixate on the sacrilege, the flames, the blood. In doing so, they unintentionally obscure the deeper continuity. Lindisfarne is not a new phenomenon. It is a larger, louder version of Portland. By the time England understands this, the pattern is already established. Coastal settlements begin to feel the pressure first. Fishermen notice unfamiliar sails. Monasteries hear rumors before they see attackers. Local lords struggle to respond because there is no clear front line. Raids strike, withdraw, and reappear elsewhere. The psychological impact is disproportionate to the physical damage. The threat is not constant presence, but constant possibility. Every quiet beach becomes a potential point of entry. This is a strategic legacy of that first encounter. Uncertainty weaponized. The Reeve at Portland represents more than an individual loss. He embodies a system that assumes compliance, predictability, and shared norms. His death signals the collapse of those assumptions at the water's edge. From this point forward, English authority will have to be defended, not presumed. Over time, this realization will lead to tangible changes, fortifications, musters, early warning systems. But those adaptations come slowly, unevenly, and often too late to prevent devastation. For decades, England reacts rather than anticipates. What makes Portland historically important is not that it begins the Viking Age in a literal sense, but that it reveals its character in miniature. Fast arrival, immediate violence, rapid withdrawal, no negotiation, no interest in governance, just enough force to achieve objectives and escape. This is not chaos. It is efficiency, and it is devastatingly effective against societies unprepared to counter it. Beduhard's name survives almost by accident. The Chronicle preserves it because scribes recognize the anomaly. Officials are not supposed to die this way, yet his story never acquires the mythic weight of later victims. There are no relics, no sermons built around his death. He becomes a footnote, a marker that historians later recognize as significant only in hindsight. In that sense, he is the archetype of the forgotten casualty, killed at the hinge point of history, before anyone realizes the door has begun to move. The irony is that Portland offers England a moment of clarity without spectacle. No sacred outrage distracts from the mechanics of the event. No emotional framing clouds the tactical lesson. Everything that will define Viking raiding in the British Isles is present in its simplest form. Had it been recognized for what it was, the response might have come sooner. But history rarely grants that kind of foresight. Instead, meaning accumulates retroactively. When later generations look back, Lindisfarne dominates a narrative because it is easier to understand. It fits moral frameworks. It produces villains and victims in stark contrast. Portland resists that treatment. It is ambiguous. It could be misunderstanding, insult, or deliberate violence. The sources do not allow certainty. But certainty is not required for significance. What matters is outcome, not intent. And the outcome is unmistakable. From this point on, the sea can no longer be trusted. England will spend the next 2 centuries grappling with that reality, sometimes adapting, sometimes failing, always reacting to a threat that refuses to behave as expected. The Viking Age will produce kings, conquest, and cultural exchange, but it begins here, in a moment so small it nearly disappears. A quiet beach, 3 ships, a man doing his job. History often announces itself loudly, but just as often it whispers. Portland is one of those whispers, a soft opening note before the storm crescendos. It is the instant when routine becomes lethal, and when the rules governing England's world quietly expire. The men who step back onto their ships leave behind more than bodies. They leave a warning, unrecognized at the time, that the age of coastal innocence is over. If this story resonated, if the overlooked moments matter as much to you as the famous ones, then keep following these quiet beginnings. History is shaped as much by what is missed as by what is remembered.